Hey everyone, getting together here to chat about some need coming from a customer who is looking to utilize the container registry in a way that maybe we had or had not envisioned, but we want to make sure we're meeting that need. So we've got several peeps here to discuss, including Jamie, Reed, Tim Rizzi, John Hampton, and Gujagosh Bizon. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Also, Joao. So the purpose of this meeting, and thanks for joining, Joao, is to sort of look through those expectations and make sure we have as clear an idea as we can. So I have in the agenda, I just have a list of questions to get a handle on the expectations from the customer. And I think probably Jamie is the best person to answer that. So I'll throw over to you, Jamie. We've got expectations from the customer in terms of timeline and performance availability and whether a new SLA is in the works.
Lots of interesting questions there. I don't know if I've got lots of answers, but I'm happy to try and fill in some gaps for folks. So, and I can share that like the call we had with the customer and Sid is recorded and notes are available, but I know that, my expectation is that if you were curious about these types of questions, you probably took a look. A lot of these aren't explicitly answered there. So we didn't set a timeline expectation, right? Eric had suggested on the customer call, hey, we've got this architecture blueprint process. Why don't we run this through that? And I guess let me back up and sort of express the problem space we're trying to solve, right? This customer joined us, in partnership about a year ago, had been trialing us, on .conf for a little bit longer than that. And our champion there recognizes that we didn't necessarily enter this partnership with the agreement to run a container registry service that would be depended upon by runtime apps, right? Like if you've got horizontal pod auto scaling in your Kubernetes cluster and you're expecting this registry to always be on, that represents sort of an additional level of commitment and availability that wasn't necessarily a part of the original conversation. Obviously, build time being, a single platform for your entire software development lifecycle delivered as a single app. I'm still working on that elevator pitch. I got to practice that more. The build time piece of the registry was understood to be, something that they could depend upon. So we took this outage, several weeks ago. It was many hours in nature, and they felt pain both on the build time side. Obviously, we would expect that, right? And unexpectedly, on the runtime side. So they came to us and said, how do we solve this problem? How do we build, either a GitLab native, like, I guess to state it very generically, right? How do we improve the availability of this? What are you doing to address that? And what tools do we have in our toolbox? So what Eric had suggested, in this meeting was, let's run it through this blueprint process, he called it, right? We didn't set explicit timeline expectations. I can go and ask for them, but I think the answer I'll get back won't be explicit. It'll just be, with every passing moment that we carry this risk, we only get so many shots at this. And if we take another long outage, which is possible given the understanding of our sort of multi-region buckets today, when I set a time, yeah, go ahead.
We should also mention that the registry is one component of the outage that happened for them and of the work that it was sort of promised to them that we would work on. There's also infrastructure implications of changing the way that sort of we handle multi-zonal regions, changing the way that we have our support contract with Google, and the way that we interact with Google during issues. And then there's some runner work that was scheduled too. So some of what came up during the customer call was this long-term work of making the registry more redundant, which was I would say the lower priority of the infrastructure and the runner work, which felt like it had some more immediate benefits for them. And so we were promising, right now we're working on the registry. We're doing this online garbage collection, which the big component of that is this manifest database that's going to store the container image manifest in a database. Once that's done, that enables us to do all other things, like maybe mirroring S3 or maybe mirroring locally. And then when we brought some of these ideas back to Joam and Haley, they were saying, well, really the biggest risk to us on the registry right now isn't necessarily the registry code or mirroring. It's more, it's the components that connect to the Rails app. So like one thing that was identified as a potential shorter midterm solution was making the API that handles auth as available as possible. So that was one idea, because, and Joam mentioned that if we don't handle that, it's going to happen again. Rails is going to go down, that auth is going to go down, and that's going to be our biggest weak point. The more advanced things that we would talk about in the blueprint architecture are like the mirroring S3. Those are more like experimental features that we don't know that we have definitive solutions for. So I'm wondering, Dan, should we focus on the things that we know that we can address that are our biggest vulnerabilities, or should we take a longer view as well and say, well, these are things that we may want to do like 7 months from now, 8 months from now, like the mirroring?
Yeah, I think the team's done a good job of sort of identifying the dependencies, and I want to call out the issue that Joam created and the chats we've already had about that, sort of identifying that, if we have issues in our authentication endpoints, not much you can do about that by working in the container registry. I think that's a good call out, and I don't want to speak for the customer's need, but from an engineering perspective, I do feel like we've made good decisions here about what we're working on, and we're well along the path to having the online garbage collection implemented, which gives us a lot of flexibility. Migrations aside for a minute, I think that's a good call. I don't want to change the prioritization from an engineering perspective, because I feel like it's been done quite well. I think the concerns that we have around some of the implementation around the infrastructure is important to address, and it's good to call that out as with a very specific example coming from a customer. So I think that's great, because it helps us sort of understand maybe this use case that we weren't super clear on for a certain type of customer that we have that's maybe using it the way it ought to be used, but ought to be used air quotes, but we need to have some improvement space there for ourselves. So I think my biggest concern for the team is that I recognize that we have 2 engineers working on this, two people, and there's work to have these people working for 3 years, and that's kind of a hard ask for people. I recognize that. Not to discount your assistance, Grzegorz, because I certainly appreciate your involvement here. Yeah, does that answer your question too?
I think so. And so really what we want to talk about is, one, is Jamie, like what we just said about sort of the long-term projects and some of the short-term projects, do you think that that's clear to the customer in terms of timeline and performance of what we're trying to tackle?
I think so. I guess the one caution I'll throw out there is we probably should bring infrastructure into the conversation. The last chat we had with Steve, he was doing the right kind of executive thing and saying, well, I don't necessarily have the mandate, the budget, the people to go and accomplish improving, beyond some of the very minimal, like the tangible items he discussed in the SIP meeting. My expectation is that he's going to go and do that. Right, but be like a meaningful change to like our SLA or our stated SLO goal. It was not something that he was signing up for. So that's a disconnect I'm a little worried about here, right? I agree with the group here. That feels like the right, most immediate place to solve this, and it is, this sort of assumption that we'll always be on.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that even if we had unlimited resources, right now we are working on adding a database to the registry, so that's a major architecture change. So our priority should be to make sure that we don't affect the current availability with the database. I think that's the most important thing to do, because if we try to do multiple major changes to the architecture, like working on mirroring like right now, that would probably be a recipe for a disaster, because it's too much to do at the same time. So yeah, I agree that for me, in my opinion, the main focus should be working in improving the availability outside of the registry. So that's the GitLab API for authentication, and also in infrastructure, if something can be improved with a multi-region GCS bucket, that would be something good. I don't know if you saw the epic that we have opened for this, but there is a task list there. I just shared the link. I'm going to post it in the agenda as well. And there are also some stuff about infrastructure there. Probably we should ping the infrastructure's managers and say if they can add any other tasks that they are working on that could improve the registry availability. I listed two there. That's the ones that I'm aware of that can be related, but there might be other opportunities for us to improve this.
One one thing I thank you, Joan, by the way, for adding that to the epic. That table's really helpful. Thank you for adding it. I would say one thing that we could add here too, which is it doesn't solve their immediate availability needs, but some of the dependency proxy work that we're doing has some benefit for them too. Not as much as in terms of the things you listed here, but it's a side benefit that has some improvement. But yeah, this looks great. What is the best way, Dan, do you think, for us to engage with infrastructure on this? Because it's kind of outside of our normal purview. I could, like, one thing that we could do is I can meet with Andrew, Thomas, and Josh and talk to them about what issues they have planned. But really, like, for what's in our control, it does seem like it is the registry stuff.
I think it might be actually an interesting opportunity to create a blueprint about the architecture of container registry in a way that we would describe availability improvements that we can make. I do agree with Joao that it seems to be an orthogonal problem to garbage collection and registry database. So having a separate technical artifact where we would describe our approach to improving availability might make sense for a customer. And this seems to be also a good idea to engage with infrastructure on the blueprint, right? That architecture workflow says that people that are working on the proposal can and should ping domain and functional experts from different departments if needed, quality infrastructure. So that's the expectation when you're working on a blueprint. So that seems like it's a good idea. And I guess that basically infrastructure team alone might not be able to do much about this problem. My understanding is that first work should be allocated on the customer side, because there is some inertia involved on the GitLab side to actually improve architecture. Architecture improvements are never happening like over the night, right? So it usually requires some time and preparation to actually start introducing them. So yeah, so then it's clear that if the, for example, object storage degradation happens again, and there is nothing done on the customer side, they are going to experience an outage or the problems again, and they are again going to come to us and escalate this even further. So I wonder if we should actually describe in a blueprint a few layers of improvements, immediate one, short-term and long-term, and send this as a suggestion to the customer.
I think they're open to that, right? Like medium, long-term, they're interested in seeing us provide kind of a GitLab native way to do this, but short-term, what they've pursued was like a pull through proxies and JFrog Artifactory, right? And they've got some sort of expanded variable sort of, circuit breaker type things they can do in some other CI YAML. And that helps them address, in sort of not maybe the most elegant or maintainable way, some of the concerns here, right? But it's a tool in their toolbox they can use in the event of a catastrophic outage again.
Yeah, okay, so they are doing something, and that's what is important, so that they aren't waiting for us. Instead, they act on the problems right now and give us some time to actually do something about it.
One thing I noted in the epic, Jamie, and I wanted to get your opinion on this, is having walked away from those sort of like the customer calls and all the conversations, I was feeling like maybe 5 nines is not exactly the goal. And I think if we had our existing availability, but we could say that we didn't have any outages more than 15 minutes, that seems more like that would achieve their goals, right?
100% agree. Yeah,
Okay.
and I mean, they brought that up to us, right? They said that explicitly, like the way in which you fail, you know, and the duration thereof is super important, right? Like 15 minutes once a week is way better than 4 hours once a quarter, right? Totally agree. And that, you know, we should bake that into some of the things we're thinking about here, right? Like if there's a smaller MVC thing we can suggest that infrastructure does that doesn't constantly cost us money, like doesn't just raise the noise floor in terms of what we're spending, but offers, like we talked about on the infrastructure side, a way to like offer an SRE, you know, that again, I'll call it a circuit breaker, right? Like, oh, you know, something's wrong with this region's bucket, I'll move to US West, right? Some kind of failover tool like that. It's not elegant, it's not maybe the most maintainable thing, it is sort of human judgment based, right? But it is something we could have used, hopefully, to turn what was a 4-hour outage into, or I'm probably misquoting the outage time, so I apologize, a multi-hour outage to something much shorter.
No, that's helpful, and I wanted to make sure Joam and Jagoras heard that it wasn't necessarily 5 nines, that it could be what our current availability of 3 nines, and then just no outages of more than 15 minutes. The other idea that we had is we're talking about growing the team. Dan, you mentioned this. We only have 2 developers, and we have 3 years of worth of work, at least, probably more like 4 or 5. We don't currently have an infrastructure person, like a stable counterpart dedicated to the package group. And I was wondering if does that happen on any other teams throughout the organization, where we wouldn't necessarily have an infrastructure person on the team, but we could have like a set or a stable counterpart situation where we work closely with them on these sorts of things?
I mean, we used to have a stable counterpart, and I guess that changed at some point. When did that change?
I don't know. I don't think we have an infrastructure stable counterpart, though, or at least that if we do, and I apologize if we do, and I'm not seeing them, but
let's go to the handbook. Go to the handbook. What does it say in the handbook?
Let's look.
Yeah, I don't believe we do either. My internet faded, so if anybody said something different, I apologize.
Yeah, we don't have a stable counterpart listed, but I think that could be an interesting idea to help the team too, because a lot of these issues that we encounter, we may not be able to, we may not have the skill set, or we may not have the expertise that someone in infra would have.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I was under the impression that we actually had stable counterparts and infrastructure set up, but maybe I'm just misremembering, because we used to have someone, I'm not going to mention the person's name, but we used to have someone that was considered, I thought, was our stable counterpart. So that's why I'm kind of like, wait up, this seems weird. Maybe I'm just misremembering. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, my preference in terms of reaching out to infrastructure is to have, you know, as Joam, Grzegorz, you all discover a need to discuss things, is to reach out to your peer in that organization, rather than be, you know, pinging Steve or Brent or someone like that and saying, hey, we need this. That's that classic box configuration that came out of the Phoenix project. At least that's how I've heard described, where we go up the chain, over, and then down the chain. And that's just an inefficient way to communicate. So I would definitely prefer that. This feels like maybe we need to do a little bit more of the organizational work there to sort of establish who we can chat with, which might be part of the steps that we do need to take. And sort of, this is partially answering your question from earlier, Tim, of like, you know, how best to reach out. And I think reaching out to the EMs is not a bad idea, but sort of figuring out if, from the infrastructure standpoint, maybe just something, Jamie, you want to be involved in is, you know, this is obviously a significant issue for a customer that we have. You know, do we need some sort of commitment? Do we need some sort of help from a team member over there on a more sort of ongoing basis rather than just as and when?
So I think that having a SRE helping a team might be very useful, especially when there's a performance degradation or an outage. But then there is another aspect, and it might be also beneficial for team members to actually learn to use metrics and all the infrastructure stuff around package software to understand how the software actually behaves in a production. So I'm certain that we do have a lot of metrics. I know that we have metrics about container registry availability. There is this updex score metric for container registry. And we might even want to add more metrics, what I'm not really sure if we are doing, right? So having SRE is very useful when something bad happens, but the team should be able to understand how their code actually behaves in a production.
Yeah, and this is a conversation we've had a couple of times of you know, when we had another outage a little while ago, one of my first questions to infrastructure was, how do our team get alerted for this particular outage? And they said they don't. And then they said they don't only because they're figuring out themselves. And the specific case that was around was a particular endpoint in our package repositories started throwing errors, but it didn't ever get to the level that would have triggered a main application, you know, an actual alert. And so what ends up happening is we don't know about it. And the question is, well, how do we know about it? How can we be informed of this? So I think that's an ongoing question for these types of things. I do want to be aware of time. We're at 8:25 my time, and I realize it's very different for certain people on this call. But do we want to cover the other questions really quickly if we can, or do we just want to go async on this stuff? I guess the second question I have is probably not for a call, just because of the nature of the question, which is asking if there are other customers that we should be considering here. So we're not going to mention that because we're recording. Maybe we could do that async. But Grzegorz, you have a question here. Do you feel like that was answered already?
Yeah, so I just wonder if the customer would appreciate seeing a blueprint about availability concerns, and if this is something that would be helpful to maintain good relation with the customer. Is that what they expect to see?
Yeah, love the suggestion and totally agree that we should be sharing this. Like a lot of the things. So John, like your weekly update, unless there's some reason we would avoid sharing that. I mean, knowing how technical our champion at this customer is, this is like perfect, right? This is bullseye for me. Are we all okay with me just sharing the contents of this issue? Awesome, I'll do that.
Thanks, Jimmy.
So I think that we are having this blueprint about garbage collection and database, but it does not really cover much of the availability concerns. And I talked with Joao about creating a separate blueprint about availability only and perhaps data durability as well. And I wonder if we should actually work on that or not. So I guess that's my question, whether we should, you know, allocate resources to actually create a blueprint about container registry availability.
I think that makes sense. We have a couple of investigations going on, mainly around the authentication, which we think it's one of the main key areas to improve. So once we have a complete understanding of that, because it spans across several components and we don't have all of the details documented, so we have to do some exploratory work. But once we have the details of that, I think we know enough to start a blueprint, which will probably not be the usual case where you create a blueprint when you already have a clear solution on your head. Sometimes this time around it will probably not be that, or at least it should list the weaknesses and the opportunities to improve them, and also detail the drawbacks and the benefits of each one of those solutions. So it's more like having a discussion over the blueprint than really just put it there for review and have someone to work on it. Yeah, and I think it is a good idea to detach this from the other one, because I see that the other one for the metadata database is being attached to these efforts, but they are really two separate things, although we have to consider the metadata database availability. But that's not strictly related with this conversation. So yeah, I think we should create a separated one.
Yeah, I think that's a great plan. I think I'm good with that. Just again, checking the time. We're over GitLab time and we're into overtime. So if everyone's happy with this, it sounds like the action items here are, we're going to share the updates that John's already doing in the Epic with the customer to make sure they're aware of it, which is awesome. I love the single source of truth and self-service aspect of that. That's a really good way to do that. I think we need to work out who we can have a stable counterpart with in infrastructure, given that we have questions. And I think separating out a blueprint once you've completed the investigation, Joan, I think I'm correct if I'm wrong, but once you've sort of got to a point where you have a sense of it, having a separate blueprint around of what availability looks like for the container registry, as well as some simple sort of actions perhaps that we could in layered terms. I think Grzegorz, you were mentioning of like, this is a real easy thing a customer could do to maybe help with the availability. I think that would be valuable as well. Did I miss anything there? Or does that sound good to everyone?
I just added one thing in chat. That sounds great. I was just going to say there's something I'm the lagging on, which is opening an issue for the business case for growing the team. I thought I was going to have that done last week, but I had some last minute PTO, so I'll get it done this week.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tim.
Thanks.
All right, peeps.
Thanks
we're
all.
at time. Thank you very much for attending. It's lovely to see everyone. I hope you all have a good rest of your day, whatever that looks like.
Cheers.
Thank you all.